My name is Emery, and I don't believe in second chances. Not for people like him. I was 23 when Maddox Hale pulled me into his orbit, all tailored suits and promises whispered like secrets. He taught me how to think like a predator, how to dress like I already belonged in rooms I was barely invited into. And when I finally caught up to him, he pushed me off the edge of the same ladder he helped me climb. I lost my job, my credibility, my reputation. And the worst part? He made sure I'd be the one to apologize. So I disappeared. I took a contract in Chicago, rebuilt what I could, learned how to make silence feel like power. And for 11 months, I told myself I was over it. Until I saw his brother. It was at a gallery opening, some clean white space in Soho with moody jazz and overpriced wine. I'd been invited by a former mentor, and I nearly didn't go. But there he was. Same eyes, same sharp jawline, same bone-deep confidence. Except softer, warmer. He introduced himself as Caleb Hale. And when he shook my hand, when his fingers lingered just slightly too long, I smiled for the first time in months. I already knew what this could be. Not an accident, not a coincidence. A slow, beautiful weapon. And I was done waiting. He bought me a drink. Nothing fancy, just a whiskey neat, with the kind of quiet confidence that didn't need to impress. Caleb was like that. The kind of man who didn't look at you like he owned you, but like he wanted to know what you hadn't told anyone else. It was disarming, dangerous even. "Have we met before?" he asked. That was the first test. His voice was curious, not suspicious, no trace of Maddox in his tone, but still, I watched his eyes for a flicker, for recognition, for a hint that maybe Maddox had mentioned me, even in passing. "No," I said smoothly, "but I feel like I've seen you around." A half-lie, the kind that tastes like truth if you don't look too closely. He laughed softly and took a sip. I'm not great with crowds, usually stick to the side of things. "You're doing fine," I told him, letting my fingers brush the edge of his glass. "You just don't seem like the type who needs to be loud to be heard." His gaze flicked to mine, thoughtful, maybe intrigued. "Neither do you." That was the moment. Right then, I knew Maddox hadn't warned him, hadn't said a word about the girl he used, burned, and discarded. Because if he had, Caleb wouldn't be looking at me like that. He didn't see a threat. He saw an invitation. By the end of the night, I had his number in my phone, under C. And 3 hours later, I sat in my apartment, staring at it, thumb hovering over the screen. "You shouldn't do this," a voice in my head said. "Not if you want to stay clean." But revenge was never about being clean. It was about being better at the game than he ever was. So I sent the message. "Tonight was nice. I'd like to see you again." 3 minutes later, he replied. "Same. I was hoping you'd say that." I turned off my phone and smiled. The first time we kissed, it wasn't part of the plan. We were on a rooftop in Brooklyn, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and string lights that made everything feel easier than it was. Caleb leaned against the railing like he wasn't watching me, but he was. Every time I said something that made him laugh, he looked at me like I surprised him, like maybe I didn't match whatever box his brother used to sort people. He didn't know I was already sorted. "You always look like you're thinking 5 moves ahead," he said, brushing a curl behind my ear. "I try not to show my hand," I said back, eyes steady. He smiled. "So we're playing poker now?" I didn't answer, just stepped closer. I let my hand rest on his chest, right over his heartbeat. I could feel it, quickening. And then I kissed him. Slow, measured, not urgent, but intentional. It wasn't about lust, not yet. It was about control. Because Caleb had no idea that everything I did that night, where I stood, how I laughed, the exact moment I looked down, was designed to see one thing: if Maddox would find out. Because if he did, he'd react. And if he didn't, I had time to make him. Back at my place, I didn't invite Caleb up, not because I didn't want to, but because I needed to keep it slow, controlled. If he thought it was just desire, he'd let it burn too fast. This wasn't about the fire. It was about the slow melt. That night, Maddox called me. Blocked number. I picked up anyway. He didn't say hello, just, "What are you doing, Emery?" I smiled into the dark. Just playing poker. Maddox didn't say anything else that night. Just that single sentence, dripping with suspicion. And something else. Possession. That's how it had always been with him. He didn't need to raise his voice or spell things out. He didn't need to touch you to make you feel owned. I used to love that. Now, it made my skin crawl. A week later, I met Caleb again, a quiet restaurant near the West Village. Intimate tables, warm lighting. He showed up in a navy coat with his sleeves pushed up, like he didn't try too hard, but still knew he looked good. He kissed me hello this time, on the cheek, respectful, hesitant, but his eyes told me everything. He was falling, and I was letting him. "What made you move back to New York?" he asked over wine. I sipped slowly. Closure. It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't all the truth. He smiled like he understood. That's brave. Brave. Not exactly. I was using him, letting his affection wrap around me like safety, just to weaponize it later. But sometimes, when he looked at me like I was the calm after a storm, I hated how easy it was to feel wanted. Not watched, not judged. Wanted. The next morning, I got a message from Maddox. No greeting. "You don't know what you're doing." I typed back, then deleted. Because I did. And that was the point. Later that day, at the office lobby, I caught him watching us, me and Caleb. Just a glance from across the marble floor. But it was enough. His jaw tight, his knuckles white around his coffee. He was unraveling, and it was beautiful. Caleb and I were in his apartment for the first time. It was cleaner than I expected. Minimalist. A few books on a low shelf, a leather couch too nice to be accidental, and a wall of photographs that were his. Cityscapes, architecture, fleeting moments caught in perfect light. He handed me a drink, then sat beside me on the couch. Not close, just near enough that if I moved my hand, I'd feel the heat of his. "You really don't talk much about your family," I said softly. He hesitated, long enough that I knew I'd hit something real. "My brother and we're not close," he said finally. He always had this way of pulling the light out of the room. That stung, more than I wanted to admit. "He ever hurt you?" I asked, barely above a whisper. Caleb looked at me, really looked. Not in a way anyone could prove. I nodded. I knew what that meant. Pain without bruises. Damage without evidence. The kind of harm that people don't believe unless they've lived it. He leaned back. Our shoulders touched. I let the moment stretch. Let silence do what words couldn't. "Is this okay?" he asked, voice low. I looked at him, at his hand brushing mine, at the way he waited instead of took. "Yes," I said, and I meant it. Not because of the plan, not because I was pretending, but because, maybe for a second, I wasn't. Later, while he slept, I stood in his hallway, in front of a door I wasn't supposed to open. I did anyway. Inside, boxes, paperwork, a framed photo. Caleb and Maddox, years ago, smiling, real. And a folder half buried, labeled EMC. My initials. I stared at it. How long had he known? I didn't touch it at first, just stood there, bare feet on hardwood, heart thudding loud enough to hear. The folder wasn't thick, but I could see a printout peeking from the edge, a timestamp, a headline, and my name, Emery Calloway. I told myself I opened it to know what he knew, not because I was afraid, not because I needed to feel in control again, but because control was the only thing I had left. The contents weren't what I expected. No background checks, no credit history, just news clippings, HR documentation, a copy of the final email I'd sent to Maddox before I left the company, the one that said nothing and everything, and a handwritten note on the inside flap. I believe her. C. My chest tightened. I stood there for a long time, unable to move, because that single sentence, 5 words, cracked something I hadn't realized I'd hardened over. I wasn't part of a game to him. I wasn't bait. I wasn't leverage. He already knew. The next morning, I didn't tell him I'd opened the door, didn't tell him what I saw. He kissed me goodbye like I hadn't crossed a line, and I smiled like I wasn't bleeding underneath. That night, I got another message from Maddox. "You've made your point." I replied, "Not yet." It was raining the day I walked into Maddox's office. Not planned, just poetic. His assistant barely looked at me, just nodded toward the glass doors like she knew this was inevitable. Maybe she did. Maybe women like me only get ignored until we stop waiting to be polite. Maddox stood when I entered, suit pressed, expression unreadable. But I saw it, that flicker, fear. "Does he know?" he asked, voice smooth. I shrugged. "He's smarter than you give him credit for." He smiled, but there was nothing kind in it. "You always did like playing victim." I stepped closer. "I didn't play anything. You just hated that I stopped pretending it didn't hurt." Silence. He moved behind his desk like it gave him power. I let him. "You used him," Maddox said, biting the words. "Whatever you think you've proven—" "I didn't have to prove it," I cut in. "You did that yourself. Every lie, every manipulation, every girl after me." He looked away, and that was when I knew he had no defense. Not for Caleb, not for me, not for the things he built his whole persona around. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket, tapped the screen, play. The recording filled the room, the one from that rooftop conversation. His words, soaked in arrogance. "You still want me to hurt, don't you? That's why you touched him like that." His own voice, damning and low. Maddox looked up, and for once, he wasn't in control. "You're not the man you pretend to be," I said, "and now everyone else gets to know that too." When I left his office, the rain was still falling, but I didn't feel wet. I felt clean. The fallout was quieter than I expected. No headlines, no legal takedown, just a slow, professional unraveling. Whispers in hallways, meetings canceled, calls he used to command now left unanswered. Maddox didn't show up at work the next day, or the day after. He was slipping, not because I destroyed him, but because I stopped shielding him from the truth. Caleb didn't text me for 3 days. I knew why. He'd found the folder. Maybe he even heard the recording. Maybe he knew it was me who leaked it. But it wasn't the silence that hurt. It was how much I wanted to explain myself when I'd spent months planning how to never need to. We met again. Not planned. A cafe near Central Park, half empty, sunlight pouring through tall windows. He saw me first, but didn't smile. "Tell me it wasn't a lie," he said.
I didn't, not right away, because it wasn't. But it wasn't clean either. I didn't mean to fall for you, I said quietly. His jaw clenched. That's not the same thing as saying you didn't lie. I looked down at the table. You were never part of the revenge, until I realized you were the only person in this city who looked at me without asking what I did wrong. He stared at me for a long time, then stood up and said, I'll call you when I'm ready. Not if, when. I don't know what happens next, but I know I walked away from that table still whole, still myself, for the first time in a long, long time. And that's enough.